Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are coming from today. It's so nice to have you here. Such an honor and a pleasure to be hosting this conversation. My name's Andrew Schwartz from the Center for Earth Ethics today. And today our conversation is part of a longer series of webinars and dialogues we've done in collaboration with and in support of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And just a big thanks to them for everything that they're doing. Today, we're talking about ecosystem restoration and plastic pollution. And I'm so delighted to be joined by such leaders and champions of this work here in the US and abroad, and just the opportunity to dig into the challenges that we're facing when thinking about how do we restore these places that have been devastated by plastics and petrochemical pollution. And so, yeah, just feel very honored to be here with you all to learn and to think and to join together as we work to solve these problems. And so it's going to be a full hour, so I'm just going to jump into it here. But just to flag a few things, please let us know who you are and where in the world you are, and maybe what brought you here today. We're going to do a Q&A at the end, so if you have questions, please raise them in the chat or by pressing the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then just to say that plastic pollution, climate change, these are very hard things. They're big mountains to climb, and it can feel overwhelming to figure out what to do. But we're all here today. We're doing this together, working in our own ways to create the change that we need to see. And so I'm grateful to each of you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for committing in this way. And so without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our speakers. First, we have Diane Wilson, a fourth generation shrimper and Goldman Prize winner for all the work that she's done. Frankie Orona from the Society of Native Nations, the executive director. James Patton, program manager for the Center for International Environmental Law. Nancy Bowie, working with the Justice for Formosa victims, both here in America as well in Vietnam. Antron, Vietnamese community of Houston, leader there, both in Houston and abroad. And then there's me, Andrew Schwartz again. And so, Nancy, if I can start with you, or excuse me, Diane, if I can start with you, you first began tracking the negative impacts from petrochemical plants beginning in 1989. Can you share a little bit of what you began seeing, what you've done, and a bit about the lawsuit that you won and what it's led to?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say that Calhoun County, where I live and where there's some very small communities, fishing communities, there's a lot of fishermen. We're on the mid-Texas Gulf Coast, but we are surrounded by industry, and uh, people have to know historically this area had more shrimp imported than any place in the United States. So we are bay shrimpers, and they were family fishermen. They had families. They went out during the day. So this was very much the entire identity of these communities. And that's what it was like, is the bays and the fish house and the fishermen were the heart and soul of these small communities. And then things started happening on the bay, and it wasn't until 1989 with the toxic release inventory or the community right to know that we even knew for the first time what these chemical companies were putting out their smokestacks, putting in their water or whatever. So this is when I started, and it was literally thrown into my lap because our county was number one in the nation for total toxic discharge to the land and for injection wells and air emissions and all of that. And it was also the time when Formosa Plastics was doing its biggest plastic expansion, the biggest in Texas history, the biggest in the United States in 10 years. And so I started in 1989. I was 40 years old. I am now 75, and I have had 35 years of tracking Formosa Plastics pollution. And it was as a fisherwoman who knew boats and nets and motors and fish houses, it's like to move suddenly on knowing what is in a chemical plant and the workers, because the fisherwoman is, and you start asking question, the company wants to say you are the enemy. They are trying to pull you down. They're trying to move you to Mexico or wherever. So I pretty much was fought a little of this on my own until I started getting some help from the commercial fishermen, and I got it from the workers in the plant. And I know what we were seeing was we had the largest dolphin die-off in the mammal stranding network's history. The dolphins were all over the bays. They were little dolphins. They were 300-pounders. There were more buzzards on the beaches than there were seabirds. And you'd go out in the bay and you could see dolphins all over the place. And then we found out all of the plastic that Formosa was putting out into the bays and on the shores and in their discharges and in their stormwater outfalls. And I remember having the fishermen would tell me that they were finding plastic in the fish they caught, in the oysters they were shucking. They were opening up and finding microplastics. So it's been a hell ride, actually. It's been crazy. It's hard to believe you can see a living, viable community of fishermen die like that. And I guess that's what upsets me so much, that these corporations can kill, not only pollute, they are killing communities. They're killing the fisheries and they're killing the fishermen. And it really makes me angry.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Me too. And it's just, and so I want to, if we can, just quickly, can you say a little bit about the restoration, or
Yeah,
the lawsuit, and what a little
yeah,
bit about
it's
what
right.
you've won in response?
Sure, sure. So we ended up, for all of this, we filed suit on Formosa. We said their plastic was all over the bays, and they totally denied it. They said they hadn't lost one pellet. So we started collecting for 2.5 years. Me and a handful of workers from the plant, we started collecting samples of Formosa's plastic into the bays and into the rivers and to the creeks. And in 2.5 years, we got 2,500 samples, and we got a legal aid law firm, the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, and we took them to court and we did a citizen clean water suit because the state, nor the EPA, nor Formosa had ever in 27 years reported a single or enforced a single violation. So in 2 years, we had 2,500 examples of them violating their permit. We went to court. We won it. We got a $50 million settlement that we put entirely into the community. We got zero discharge of plastic, and we also got enforcement monitoring, and we got cleanup. And so that's where the restoration is we put $20 million into the Matagorda Bay Fishery Cooperative that was for diversity, sustainability, equitable, and that because we have Vietnamese, we have Hispanic, and we have working class fishermen, and we're trying to revive them. We're trying to help them form this co-op, which they have already farmed. It's been 3.5 years in the making. They have now filed with the state of Texas, and they're in the process of getting a processing plant, and they are the owners. And they're working together, and so this is one of best the best things about this settlement, this lawsuit with Formosa. It's attempt to revive the fisheries, the fishermen, and the communities.
Thanks, Diane. And I want to come back to that more in a little bit. But I want to also flag that this is not just going on in Matagorda Bay, right? Like
Right.
Formosa is one of so many petrochemical plants, and the devastating impacts are so profound. And so, Nancy, if I can move to you, because I know the work that you've been doing, especially on the heels of Formosa's hot tin steel dump that happened back in 2016, which had similar effects and impacts on that community. And so if you can share a little bit about that spill and what it did to the community health, the ocean health in that region.
Yes, thank you, Andrew, and everyone. From my background, born, living, surviving Vietnam War, after which I escaped Vietnam by boat and spent 22 days in the ocean with my two young children. We spent 8 months in refugee camp in Thailand before being settled in the US in 1979. I did not pay much attention to the environment until 2016, when the environmental disaster caused by Formosa Plastic in Vietnam, which Formosa Plastic USA is the largest investor, that dumped over 100 metric tons of toxic chemical waste, including cyanide, chlorine, mercury, and heavy metal, which killed over 100 metric tons of fish, many birds, and then disrupt all the marine life in the ocean of Hà Tĩnh and then the center of Vietnam. The dead fish flow along the coastline for over 200 kilometers, affecting such a vast area in Hà Tĩnh, Quảng Bình, Quảng Trị, and Thừa Thiên, polluting a vast area, putting the entire fishing industry and 179 people out of work. One diver died, and hundreds of people have to hospitalize because they have food poisoning. The government prohibited fishermen from going to fishing for 2 years because the marine life was contaminated. The chemical disaster was followed by the irresponsibility and greed from Formosa and the Vietnamese government, who initially denied and covered the situation under the pressure from the public, both inside and outside of Vietnam. An environmental study was conducted by over 100 local and international scientists, which showed that Formosa would at fault. However, this study was never released to the public, as the Vietnamese government cited it as a national security matter. Formosa offered pay $500 million without any study for the real damage. They pay it to the government, not to the victim. Soon, thousands of victims receive little to no compensation for what they have lost. When they attempt to file the lawsuit in local court, they and the advocate who raised the voice to protect the victim were stopped, beaten, and arrested, and imprisoned with heavy sentence of up to 20 years. 8 years have passed, and 23 of them are still in prison as we speak. Since victims cannot find justice in Vietnam, they have called out for help. Catholic Bishop Nguyễn Thái Hợp, who was in charge of the region at the time, went to Europe and the US to seek assistance. We met with him and formed Justice for Formosa victims in 2017. After over 2 years, with help of lawyers and NGOs in Taiwan, the US, and many other countries around the world, we helped 7,874 victims file a lawsuit in Taiwan in June 2019. You can imagine the immense amount of work involved with 4 legal systems: Vietnam, Taiwan, the US, and international environmental law. Many nights I did not sleep because Vietnam and Taiwan are on the opposite side of the globe, and daytime of my opposite my time. So I face a lot of pressure. I also face a lot of pressure from cyber attack, regularly being called as all sort of names like cheater, scammer, and even prostitute. But I kept going because I knew that without our help, the unfortunate victim could not never find justice.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you for enduring. I think that's something that can be lost, not just how hard this work is and how vicious the attacks are from the other side. And to you, just enormous gratitude for persevering, for all the people who've been impacted. And if I can then transition to you on a little bit more on the impacts, because as we were discussing yesterday, you mentioned that you worked well, volunteered on your brother's boat, and you were mentioning just kind of the before and after effects that you've seen. And Diane, you hinted at this as well, what a robust fishery that region was and what it's become. And so, can you speak a little bit to your own experience and what you've seen both for your brother and other of the fishers who are in the region, what they're experiencing?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving us a voice, a Vietnamese voice in this very important conversation. So a little bit about myself. I'm living in Houston. Well, I am a president of the Federation of the American Vietnamese Community of USA, which represent 30 Vietnamese community in the US. And every major city in the US, the Vietnamese American form together, form a nonprofit, and elect their board of director. And every 3 years, so 30 Vietnamese community representative from their local Vietnamese community come together to vote for a board of director for the Federation of Vietnamese American. So in 2021, I was fortunate or honored to be elected to be a board of director, president of the Federation of Vietnamese Community. So today I'm represent the voice of Vietnamese American living in the Gulf Coast area, especially in Louisiana and Texas. So after the Vietnam War in 1975, many Vietnamese escaped communists, just like Nancy Boo just told you. So we migrate into the US as a refugee. So most of the Vietnamese American moved to the Gulf Coast were uneducated, and they have little job in industrial job skill. So fishing was easy choice for them. So that's why most of the Vietnamese live in Texas and Louisiana, move here. And my brother was one of them. So at the age of 14, he had to quit school to go to work to raise us. So when we moved to America, he was uneducated, have no job skill. So we moved to the Gulf Coast. We bought a little boat, and start fishing. And it was easy to adapt, right? But at that time, around 1987 or 1994, we make a good living. And I love it, even though I work for free, I enjoy it, right? So because every load we pull up, we got hundred of shrimp. I mean, jumbo shrimp. I mean, we make a killing there because the shrimp price was good then. But in 1994, I joined the Army, U.S. Army, and traveled the world. But when I went back to my brother in 2002, I see the big difference, right? My brother's still fishing, but his cash was less and less, and the diesel price went up, shrimp price went down because of all the import from China. So they cannot make money. So most of Vietnamese in the Gulf Coast area went bankruptcy, and some of them still hang in there because they have no other job skill. My brother was fortunate learn welding, so he moved to the welding area. But most of the Vietnamese American was older than him. They have no job skill, cannot jump job, so they have to stuck with this fishing industry. And because we undereducated, we don't read the news, we didn't follow politics, so we didn't know why the shrimp, we catch less and less shrimp. We didn't know why. But now we are educated because of nonprofit um, Mr. Wilson and all the nonprofit environmental. We start to get educated by them. And now we know that because of all the industrial, chemical, uh, oil and gas industry that kill all the shrimp, and now people live in the area. Not only they make less living, but they live in a harmful environment, right? Harmful because now with all the chemical, all the plastic, and they have to live in the area, work in the area, and eat all the fish, oyster in the area. So it is very unfortunate that uh, all the shrimp and fishermen in the area suffer from this because of all the big industrial. So now, hopefully, I learned from you and from Diana, so we can somehow work together with all the nonprofits, so we can educate Vietnamese American, and hopefully we come up with solution for this problem.
Hey, thank you so much, and for those reflections, and just to speak to what's happened in these communities, just like Nancy and Diane before you. And I want to come to you now, Frankie, if I can, because there's a larger framework here, and the title for this begins with sacrifice zones. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to just what we mean by sacrifice zones, and this idea of restoration. Then, right? What does it mean? How do we understand restoration within this context of sacrifice zones and the defilement of people, of sacred spaces, of species, as we look for these next steps forward?
Yeah, thank you, Haku. I think there's, for indigenous peoples, first and foremost, we acknowledge that we're part of the environment, that we're not separate from the environment, and to make sure and ensure that our children have a healthy, sustainable future. We know that we have to have a relationship with our environment to keep things in balance. And so for people living in what I say industry and government has deemed sacrifice zones, restoration has dual meanings to many. Environmental health restoration, means and aims to heal the land and ecosystems that have been ravished by extraction over and over again. This can involve, cleaning contaminated soil and water, replanting native vegetation, and bringing back lost wildlife, creating those relationships again, right? Renewing them. This creates a healthier environment, reducing the exposure of the pollutants, and improving the quality of life for the environment and ourselves as human beings. If we want to have a healthy, sustainable future as human beings, then we need to make sure that our environment is healthy, put back in balance again. So, the social and human health and economic justice, restoration goes beyond just the environment. It's about addressing the human health, social and economic injustices faced by sacrifice zone communities. That involves, community involvement. We need the community involvement. We need to demand the community involvement in these processes and projects. Residents should have a say in how restoration projects are planned and implemented. This ensures the solutions addresses their needs and concerns. Healthcare is an issue. Resources. Communities often experience high rates of illness due to pollution exposure. Restoration efforts should include healthcare access and long-term health monitoring programs. The economic opportunities, many sacrifice zones suffer from economic depression due to the industry's perpetuation of poverty. Restoration projects can create new jobs, in areas like, responsible renewable energy, and sustainable agriculture. But again, those projects need to lead with the security, protection, and safeguards for human health and the environment. If it doesn't, then it's not going to work. It's going to be another false solutions. For sacred spaces and communities impacted by extraction and pollution, restoration takes on additional layers and meanings, because it's about healing the sacred. To us, it's sacred. We have a relationship, a connection. It's being connected to those that came before us and those that will come after us. It connects us to each other throughout generations. So many cultures have sacred spaces that have been desecrated by extractive practices. Restoration efforts should involve acknowledging the cultural and spiritual significance of the land. This could involve incorporating traditional practices, beliefs into the restoration process. Reconnecting with the land means that, pollution and environment degradation can serve the connection between people and the natural world. Restoration offers an opportunity, true restoration, offers an opportunity for communities to reestablish a healthier relationship with the land they consider sacred. This can involve educational programs, cultural events that foster the appreciation and respect for the environment. The love, right? Look at it as if, if you treat it, the land with love, like you love that loved one in your family, whether it be your family, loved ones, your father, your mother, your children, your spouse, you don't want to harm it, you want to nurture it. And so let's nurture that air, let's nurture the land, let's nurture the environment, that's how we'll put things back in balance. That's how we do things responsibly and equitably, with accountability. And so, some of those challenges are going to be the cost, right? The cleaning up the contaminated sites and restoring ecosystems, can be expensive. Securing long-term funding is crucial and should lead to corporate responsibility. The industry should be the one to absorb the cost. The accountability, holding those polluters accountable for the damage they've caused, is essential to ensure restoration efforts are successful and future contamination is prevented. Now, restorations take time. Communities may have to wait years before seeing significant improvement in their environment and in their health. And sometimes that's what we have to look at, right? We talk about, our human interactions and trying to make these things happen. And sometimes the environment just needs to be left alone, to be cleaned up and removed of the things that we put there, and allow itself to heal itself. It will heal itself. We need to stop doing things that we think are going to contribute to this restoration project, when sometimes the land would do it for itself. This planet, this Mother Earth, she'll survive. She'll be okay. It's just a matter of it's going to be with us or without us. What part are we going to play? What responsibility? What are our future generations going to say? Are they going to hold us responsible for what we do and don't do today? I really hope so, because we have an opportunity right now to make drastic change. We're more aware of these challenges more than ever. So despite those challenges, restoration offers a path, towards a future where sacrifice zones become healthier and thriving communities again. But we must, again, lead with the security and protections and safeguards to prevent the damage in those communities, in our communities, from ever happening again, right? That continued cycle of perpetuation of poverty, by industry and by our government. And, we must make sure that any proposed restoration projects by state and federal agencies are not an illusion for expansion. Because I can tell you, in our home territories, the wetlands.
Let me get to that. I want to jump in on that in a little bit later, because that is such a good point.
I mean, yeah, it's
going to come back to that.
Huh?
I said I'll get back to that, but I want to jump to Jane, because you let her in.
Sure.
Perfect. But we'll get back to that, because Jane, I think one thing that we've talked about, right, is in this restoration, and this is a desperately hard question to ask, but it's an important one, because as you raise, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to see sea level rise. in a lot of these places.
Yeah.
We're going to see in a lot of these sacrifice zones, right? These appointed sacrifice zones are going to be submerged. And so there's this question around restoration. There's this question around human rights of how do we hold these in community, in space, knowing, Frankie, like you were just saying, what we need to do right now in order for these things to be just, to have this human rights element, to find a way to revive and restore a relationship in community. Also knowing that some of these places are going to be lost. So Jane, I wonder, yeah, if you can speak to that a little bit and how you see it.
I mean, I want to ground exactly what Frankie was just saying, and I think what all of us have been saying here, in the fact that this is not just a should or would like to have. This is a must. We have rights under international law. Every person on this planet has a right to clean air, to clean water, to dignity. As of last year, we also now have a right to a healthy environment. We also, as Frankie was outlining, if we have been harmed by corporations or the government, if we are being harmed by the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis, we have a right to remedy. These things have been repeatedly enshrined in international human rights law, which this country and other countries like to pretend to hold themselves accountable to. And one of the things that we need to be talking about here is that many of us are actually from groups with protected rights: Indigenous peoples, women, children and youth, laborers. We have special protected rights on top of the rights that every person has to clean air and clean water and dignity and a healthy environment. We also have a right to a freedom from discrimination, in particular, racial discrimination. And when we're talking about sacrifice zones, we are talking about areas where the attitude of government and corporation, some increasingly clearly, is, well, there's already so much damage there. Why damage somewhere else when we can just continue damaging the place we've been damaging for decades at least? And that is an attitude that assumes that damage is necessary. And I think that's what we have to get away from, is realizing that if we are going to actually uphold people's rights to clean air, clean water, dignity, freedom from discrimination, we have to stop assuming that some degree of damage is necessary. We have to start asking ourselves, how do we protect clean air, clean water, dignity without damage to anybody, much less sacrifice zones that have already been receiving so much damage and so much abandonment. Just last year, actually, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, as it's called, that's an acronym that rolls off the tongue, established what they call a loss and damage fund, specifically to address the harms that have been caused by the climate crisis. And I don't think it's surprising for anybody for me to tell you that that fund is woefully inadequate. The remedies and stipulations are way too small. They're very ineffective. And that is because of the positions that the US government and other governments have taken to make them small and ineffective. And this is part of the challenge that we're up against, is that our very governments, which are meant to be acting in the public good, whether we're talking about the national government or the state and local government, whether we're talking about the US or Vietnam or somewhere else, are not actually acting in the public good and are negotiating in international spaces in ways that are not aligned with the rights that we are all entitled to and have been entitled to since the beginning of creation, but established under international environmental law, international law, at least since the 1940s and 50s. So this is long-standing legal precedent that our governments are not following here. And I think one of the most detailed descriptions that I've seen thus far about where those violations of human rights law intersect with the plastic pollution crisis is actually in an investigation that the Center for International Environmental Law, the Center for Biological Diversity, and Earthworks did in partnership and review with many of the folks on this call about Formosa Plastics. Nancy was telling us quite a detailed story of what happened with Formosa in Vietnam. Diane was talking about what happened with Formosa in Texas. Both of those issues are covered in this investigation, among a number of other incidents and egregious violations of environmental integrity and human rights law by Formosa Plastics. As an example, Formosa is not a unique actor. The very essence of plastics production, the assumption that we can make disposable plastics, the assumption that it is okay for us to emit pellets or toxic air pollution, as Diane and Frankie were detailing, just to have this consumer product, that very assumption is baked into all plastic production and all government approval of plastic production in a way that violates human rights on many levels. And we have got to move away from that. When it comes to plastics, we actually can't separate plastics from the climate crisis. These are two intertwined crises, not least of which because they're both affecting and harming biodiversity, but also because they're both releasing greenhouse gas emissions, and they're both perpetuating toxic air emissions, and they're both making life less secure and less safe for people all over the planet. There is, however, no dedicated fund for cleaning up the plastics that are in the environment or for redressing the exposure to toxic production chemicals and chemicals from toxic use. There is a dedicated loss and damage fund for the climate. It is woefully inadequate. There isn't one for plastics production. And this is hopefully one of the pieces that will get discussed under the new plastics treaty, which I think Frankie is going to talk about in a minute. And I just want to say, you know, to your question, Andrew, about restoration and the harms that are already being exhibited, you know, Diane's monumental win in Texas is a huge step toward remedy of a particular harm, but the fight is so much greater than that. The Gulf of Mexico, as many of us know, is rising faster than almost any other body of water on the planet. And all of us on the call right now, live in the coastal zone of the Gulf of Mexico. People are being abandoned financially and physically every day. We are being abandoned by our government. We are being left to figure out how to find a new homeowner's insurance policy. We are being left to figure out how to navigate flooded streets, how to keep our houses safe when it rains, not when a hurricane comes, when it rains, which it's been doing all day here in Louisiana. We're having to cancel meetings because power is out across the state, because tornadoes are touching down in Louisiana. I am a sixth generation Louisianian. I did not grow up with tornadoes in this state. And that is a new development in the ever-changing climate and the more and more extreme weather that is coming to South Louisiana and South Texas. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the scientific body of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, shows that the outlook for South Louisiana, for Texas, for Florida, and other Gulf Coast communities, including Mexico, is very bad. I am prepared to no longer be able to safely live in my home before I'm done paying its mortgage. And that is a reality that all of us in South Louisiana and Texas and Florida and across the Gulf of Mexico are facing. I'm one of 500,000 people in Louisiana alone that will be affected by that, and millions of people around the Gulf Coast. And it is a startling reality that is very personally affecting to me, not just because I have to figure out where I'm going to live, but also because I've lived in South Louisiana my whole life. My 4 generations of my family are buried here. 3 generations of my family currently live here. My husband's family goes back 7 generations. Where are we going to go? We don't have a plan right now because we are being abandoned. And one of the ways that I process and deal with this is I get the flora and fauna of South Louisiana tattooed on my body, the cypress trees that I've grown up with, the pelicans that are the state bird of Louisiana, the magnolia flowers that are right now starting to bloom, the jasmine. It's my favorite time of year when the jasmine blooms in South Louisiana, and it just popped in the last few days. And we are losing this on top of losing our familiarity and our family structures and our closeness. And this is what we are facing. And none of this had to happen this way. This was all a choice by governments, by corporations to sacrifice these areas, to allow for these companies to get these permits and to keep getting these permits. And what we have to deal with now is the restoration, as Frankie is talking about, the restoration that also does not violate people's human rights and is a net positive, a benefit for that relationship that we have with the environment. But we also need a remedy and we need a prevention mechanism for the harms that are already coming. We need financial and legal protections lined up now in order for me and my family to have a place to go when we have to leave the flood zone in South Louisiana. And in order for us, and not just me, but for the millions of people that are going to be affected by the rising of the Gulf of Mexico, to not be financially ruined. There will be no one to sell my house to. So where am I going to live? And that is a question that I don't know how to answer. And as a relatively young person in this conversation, like, I'm still going to be working when I have to leave my home. And we don't have a remedy for that. And that is a problem. And that is one of the things that we are trying to figure out how to address.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. I just, like I said, these are, yeah, they're impossible questions. I don't know. I mean, as another relatively young person in this conversation, looking at my own life here in Oregon, I don't know. For my kids, I don't know. But I do think that we're here and we're trying. And that's what we got. And I mean, I'm looking at our time and I'm not apologetic for the fact that we've run a little bit over because I'm just so grateful to all of you for everything you've contributed to this. But I do want to kind of think into these next steps. And so I'm going to be a little bit more judicious in the timekeeping here. But Diane, if I can go to you, because the lawsuit that you won, the way that you've been able to put Formosa back into some sort of place is so valuable and important. As we think, as Jane, as you're saying, you know, these things are still ongoing. And so, Diana, I wonder from you, what lessons would you like to impart from the work that you've done, or from the victory that you've seen that you want others to learn from? And in this sense of dealing with corporations, I'm just so curious if you could share on that.
Well, I know with Formosa Plastics, I have been fighting them for 35 years. So I know them extremely well. Matter of fact, I've talked to some of their upper management, and quite frankly, I think I know them better than Formosa knows themselves sometimes. And so I have, I think basically, while it has been extremely persistent, most of the fight has been through civil disobedience. I refuse, and this is something that Frankie brought up, is like, I have a relationship with the water and I absolutely refuse to let them have it. It's like, that's the line I've drawn and they will not get it. And when they try something else, I mean, sometimes it's gut instinct off the top of my head. And I think of something to try to block them. And so I am notorious for never having a plan. And so to find this lawsuit at this time, and it blows me away. I'm as surprised as everybody else, but I really believe the earth has energy and has intelligence. And if we just put ourselves out there, and I mean out there almost in places where it gets a little uncomfortable, I believe some energy and intelligence and wisdom comes that we didn't even know we had. But I can tell you a real practical thing that anybody who goes after industry and they try to get a settlement, always, always make sure that you have an enforcement on your agreement with them. Over the years, I have done many agreements with Formosa. And I mean, the minute I got any type of little thing, I mean, they were wiggling out of it. I mean, like on the second day. And, and I remember I would bring it up and it's like, how can they do that? How can they back out of it like that? Then they're like, oh, you just got sour grapes, Diane. And it just really, really makes me angry because it's like you invest almost your entire life. But I know with this settlement that we got with Formosa, it is backed up. And if Formosa moves, it doesn't abide by the regulations, the enforcement, the monitoring, the cleanup, every aspect. If they don't do it, we go back to court. It's enforced with, we go right back to federal court. And so Formosa has had to abide by the agreement. And I think probably at this point, they are weeping to themselves in the boardrooms. They are very upset about all of this. And I think industry now is a little bit locally, they're a little bit leery of me because they see what Formosa has to stand by. And and like some of the for example, not only have we got this cooperative with the fishermen, but we have been able to make them for their monitoring of their discharges and their stormwater outfalls that were tremendous. They had 10 outfalls. And to give you an example, I know on one stormwater outfall, it was documented, they had 167,000 pounds of pellets released in one day. And they've been doing it for 27 years. But
Right.
they have had to put these stormwaters, it's now in big ponds and they cannot discharge it. And it's cost them over $1 billion.
Wow.
So when Jane talks about money, it's like they do. It costs a lot of money to keep a creek restored from these corporations and to do the cleanup of the pellets they put out in the creek. I mean, it's $30 million, 2 years. They had drag lines digging down sometimes to 3 feet to remove the pellets that they embedded all over. So there is a tremendous amount of expense that citizens, the community, the front line is having to deal with, and industry by and large, they get a free run. And a matter of fact, anytime a fisherman complains, they say, that's progress. That's progress. We're not even in the equation, and we have to force ourselves to be the equation.
That's right. Thank you. Thanks so much, Diane. And Nancy, if I can, for you, because I know you've been doing so much work through legislation with Congress, and I would love for you to share a little bit about what you're doing, especially for those victims in Vietnam. And I'm going to pull up share my screen really quick so you can share a little bit more about what you're doing to try to force the change that we need to see.
Yes, I need to go through the procedure of the court before I can get into the advocacy that I have so much help from organization. Diane is my dear friend, my saver, my everything when she spent 30 days hunger strike in front of Formosa Plastic Factory in Point Comfort. So I would like to officially say thank to her and all the effort from her and other organizations who helped the victim in Vietnam, done by, of course, Taiwanese government and also American company, Formosa Plastics USA. The company from the US, they either pollute in the US or abroad. They need to be accountable for the same. So the lawsuit in Taiwan had entered its 5th year, having encountered denial from both district and high court. However, the fortunate development occurred when the Supreme Court granted jurisdiction to the victim in late 2020. Despite this positive step, nearly 4 years later, the victims are still entangled in the complexity of the court procedure. Formosa have thrown a new obstacle into the mix by requesting that the court mandate the authentication of the victim power of attorney, first by the Vietnamese government and then by the Office of Taiwan Economic and Culture in Hanoi. This demand presents a difficult, I could say that, close to impossible to challenge, given the Vietnamese government complete control and its obstructionist stand toward the victim quest for justice. Moreover, despite the victim lawyer having clandestinely arranged for the signing of the POA in Vietnam, with the proceeding documented through photo and video evidence, the court had previously accepted this process for 2 years. Formosa certainly insistence on authentication imply a calculated effort to impede the victim access to justice, as Formosa had long been aware that Vietnamese government actively sought to prevent this lawsuit from proceeding whether within Vietnam or outside of Vietnam. To the advocacy of lawyers and other environmental and human rights activists in Taiwan and the U.S., and within the intervention of 7 bipartisan Congress member letter, the Taiwan Minister of Foreign Affairs lowered the requirement, now only requiring the victim to go through the Taiwan Office of Economic and Cultural. However, this assistance is not sufficient. Victims who went to this office were stopped and threatened, and their helper was summoned. The police office for investigation and threatened with arrest and imprisonment if they continue to assist. The recently local police in Quang Binh went even further, using 3 trucks to surround the village for 3 nights, broadcasting announcement prohibiting anyone going from going to Hanoi to complete their paperwork, labeling our effort as a scam. The victims are now in shock, fear, and discouraged. This act of disruption is being processed by Justice for Formosa victim, and I myself will introduce Diane and also later Jane. We all together, because we have the same company that we have to deal with. We form International Monitor Formosa Alliance, and our partners that are Friend of the Earth, Break Free from Plastic, Earth Right Center for International Environmental Law that we have representative here, Jane. Earthwork and many other organizations around the world are advocating for environmental and human rights. The Vietnam government always claimed that Formosa plastic case is done deal. The fish already come back, all the victim already compensated, and then environment been cleaned up, but that's good, the lie. So we are, like you said, Andrew, that we have to use advocacy work to go through the U.S. government and then or other governmental to ask for help. We are asking the Taiwan government to consider waiving the requirement for the victim to authenticate their POA to the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Office. This lawsuit is not typical. The plaintiff environmental and human rights was seriously violated, while the court required them to risk their security and life for justice. The second is we want Vietnamese government to stop all the retaliatory action against the victim and ensure their ability to complete the necessary paperwork for legal proceeding in Taiwan and the U.S. court, because Taiwan, USA have part of it. So we are working seriously and tirelessly to find a way to file a lawsuit against Formosa in the U.S. and unconditionally release all the prisoners who have been unjustly detained for their advocacy on behalf of the victim, and advocate for an independent study of pollution in the Vietnamese government and Formosa Plastics have to do this. We want it independently, because they always claim that they already done, they already clean everything. So, and the U.S. we urge or beg the U.S. government should use diplomatic intervention to urge Taiwan and the Vietnamese government to fulfill their obligation to the victim according to their law, international environmental and human rights law. This would help the victim fight justice, and Formosa Plastics would take their responsibility for its victim. We are circulating a sign-on letter that Andrew will post earlier, addressed to the Vietnamese government from the U.S. Congress, sponsored by Representative Joe Lofgren, and urging organizations to endorse it and exert pressure to the Vietnamese government to fulfill its obligation. You know, the bilateral agreement between the U.S. and Vietnam government, particularly Article number 7, reinforced the right to seek legal redress in court for dispute. The active engagement of the U.S. Congress and the State Department in assisting Vietnam in leveraging this agreement underscore the importance to a fair and transparent legal system to foster investment and trade relations. However, the handling of Formosa incident by the Vietnamese government had raised significant concern among the U.S. government, the U.S. and international business community, and human rights advocacy organizations.
That's
I
right.
beg you, I would like to share the link and already on the screen. And thank you so much for your support and your listening.
Thank you, Nancy. And yes, we've posted that link into the chat, and I will also be sharing that out in all of our communications after this webinar with everyone who's attended and through our other work. So thank you for that. And I know we're getting close on time, and so An and Frankie and Jane and to everyone here, we'll continue on, though we're going to go a little bit over the hour, and apologies for that. I hope you'll understand. But An, I wanted to come to you, if I could, knowing the position that you hold and the way that you're representing. And I think this question of for so many of these Vietnamese workers around these questions of, human rights and workers' rights, what are things that you're hearing or would like to advocate for as we look to the future of better protections for the shrimpers and for these communities?
Yes, every year in May, the Federation of Vietnamese Community, we went to Washington, D.C. to lobby for human rights in Vietnam. This year, we will do it from May 14 to 16, 2024, to advocate for human rights in Vietnam. Some of the activists in Vietnam, they were put in prison by the Vietnam government because they protest Formosa, because they want to raise the voice of their people. So every year we went there to advocate for their freedom. So, but surprisingly, back in the United States, now I have learned that from Ms. Wilson and learn from all of you that people live in the Bay Area. The Vietnamese American living in the Bay Area, specifically in Point of Conflict, their human right was violated by all these industrial company. Just like Frankie and Jane just mentioned, in the international human rights, in 2021 and 2022, the United Nations Human Rights Council and General Assembly recognize that everyone have the fundamental human right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But now we know that all the disadvantaged shrimper and fishermen living in the Vaca Bay or its vicinity, their basic human rights were violated. They live in an unhealthy environment. They have to work in the unhealthy environment because they're shrimper, fishermen in the bay, and they have to eat what they catch, all the fish and the shrimp that they eat, all the poison the big industrial company release. So now we depend on our government, the U.S. government, to protect us because we live in the USA, right? This is not a third world country, so we trust our government. We depend on government agency to protect us, and yet now I learned from Diane and all you that our government is more cater to the big corporation owned by the foreigner, not by the local company. They neglect to take care of the local small business like shrimper, fishermen, and they allow all the big corporations to violate the basic human right. So we like to change that. So thank you very much for all your work and all the research you did, all the information you put out. You put pressure on our government, you put pressure on the big corporation. You work hard, very hard to protect our basic human right. So thank you very much for that. We have to do better to keep our local swimmers, fishermen, local people first living in healthy environment, work in a healthy environment, and have the right to enjoy all the beauty the bay have. You know, when a month ago, Wilson invited me to meet with the Port of Engineer, the Department of Engineer, the U.S. Army Department of Engineer, and I told them, because as I drive to the Bay Area, I see all the new RV location just pop up, and all the beauty thing that the area, the bay can offer. I told the commander that, hey, this is a beautiful area. We need to protect it. We cannot we cannot fund put our own money, our tax dollar money to support all this big corporation, and yet destroy all the environment, all the beautiful thing the base they have. So thank you very much for your hard work, and hopefully we can work together to keep the Bay Area clean, beautiful, and to protect our people.
Thank God. And Frankie, if I can move to you, because I know we're both going to be in Ottawa here in a couple weeks, and so if you can speak a little bit to what you hope to get out of the Inc. 4 plastic treaty that's coming up, and this connection then around, just as you were raising earlier, about how are we doing restoration the right way? How do we approach these in the right way from the beginning? And if I know, Jane, you sent me a quick note, I'll probably ask you for a final little word, but Frankie, if you can round us out with what to look forward to and maybe what we can do together in our own communities for those of us who aren't going to be involved in these international negotiations.
Yeah, sure. For me personally, going to the INC, being involved in the Global Plastics Treaty, it's definitely an opportunity to open some dialogue, have some conversations, but I'm there to help make things uncomfortable, to remind them of the humanity in these discussions that's being left out. I'm there because this process is inequitable in all forms when it comes to the inclusion of frontline disproportionately impacted community members. You have 60-70% more in industry representatives in this space than you do actual people that truly know real solutions to the problem, addressing the root cause of the problem, not coming up with false solutions that don't address the root cause. I'm there because the State Department is very much, the U.S. State Department is in this process, and the INC is lacking in participation on stands on their position. They're them addressing the plastic pollution crisis as refurbishment, repair, and recycle of plastics is at the detriment of our communities, where the industry is going to continue to perpetuate that poverty in our communities because of industry's infrastructure built in our communities, where extraction and production is being done, and transportation that's being left out of the conversations, leaving out communities that have been disproportionately impacted for generations. My hopes is that we can add enough pressure to the U.S. State Department and other states to really work hard towards an ambitious treaty. We want the U.S. to really step it up and have an ambitious treaty, and let Congress decide and figure out how to ratify. It's not their position to nitpick. We want that ambitious treaty. We want some goals. We want real stance. We want real inclusion in talking about these solutions, especially when we're talking about just transition. Because just transition, for me personally, doesn't exist right now. If we're not leading with solutions, with first and foremost talking about the security, protections, and safeguards for human health and the environment, then it's just another extractive industry going from one to another. And it's gonna be a false solution. When we talk about the restoration projects being proposed, the reason why is because the reason why I brought it up was because we are dealing with that in our wetlands, in our tribal territories in California, where they're proposing restoration projects. But if you read the fine print, it's also adding new wells during the restoration project. It is something that we need to continue to be vigilant about and hold them accountable, force the transparency, so that way we know exactly that what they're trying to do, which is an expansion project, not a restoration project. And I think that by doing that means that we need to be more in these spaces. Industry and our government, they come into these what they deem sacrifice zones because they expect the least resistance, right? And that's where I'm saying, you know what, we're not an infomercial where you get uncomfortable about what you're seeing and you get to flip the channel because you're too uncomfortable and you don't want to face the realities. Well, we're saying there ain't no more channels to flip to. We're saying stop flipping the channel. We don't have that option in our communities. And while they want to talk about preambles, our community members are dying at exponential rates than ever before. And so for me, the government and industry have gotten really good at, creating chaos amongst our communities and division and divisiveness. And I think that's what our tactics should be. I'm there to create some chaos in between government and industry to really bring the true voices of what needs to be heard and what needs to be at the table in these negotiations, because it's our people, it's our communities that have been impacted for generations. And it needs to be stopped. Enough is enough, and we need to start saying at what expense. And if they think that it's only happening in these so-called sacrifice zones in our communities, no, it's coming for them. If it's not, it's already silently started taking over. It is in the air, it is in the land, in the food, in the agriculture, it is everywhere. And they're going to be impacted. And so it's not just our future generations that we're talking about saving. We're talking about saving all future generations, and that's what they need to realize. So that's why I'm there. So I'm sure Jane can jump in a little bit more and get more nitty gritty on the true asks when we're talking about chemicals and issues of concern, and how they're not trying to really look at extraction and production as being part of the plastic pollution crisis. They're looking at it as a waste management issue, and we're not going to solve it if we're looking at it as a waste management issue. If we're not talking about product reduction, extraction, reduction in all, in these emission issues in all the extraction projects, and no matter what industry what we're talking about, we need to create balance. And I'm here to help try to remind them of that and make them feel uncomfortable as much as possible, to kind of force them to make some change, right? And I said this earlier to someone else, is that unfortunately the only ways that I've seen real change is when you make them feel uncomfortable, when you challenge their reputation or you affect their money. That's the only time I've ever seen real change. So that's what I'll leave with that. Thank you, Chet.
Thanks, Frankie. And I think that's been a theme throughout, is how do you perpetuate discomfort? Because so much of it's already being perpetuated on people who don't want it. How does it go back the other way? And for that, Pearl, I'm grateful. And so Jane, any final words from you? I don't want to exclude any last words you may have.
I just want to, I think everybody has already said it beautifully. I think Frankie pointed out that one of the reasons why they think of sacrifice zones as sacrificable is because they assume that they will not face resistance. And knowing about all of the incredible local groups and national groups and international groups that we are all organizing with and that we are all building. Nancy talked about the coalition for Formosa justice that she and Diane and Sharon are building. And Frankie talked about the coalition into the plastics treaty that has been built over the last few years. We also have a coalition in Louisiana against false solutions, which includes carbon capture and chemical recycling and all that. I mean, and that's not even talking about the break free from plastic movement and the global climate movements. I mean, they are facing so much resistance that companies are deciding to pull out of plans for building and plans for manufacture. And that is huge. And that resistance has to keep growing. I want to say that we've seen an interesting development in the US policy specifically toward the treaty over the last couple of weeks. And I haven't even had the opportunity to tell Frankie this yet. We actually saw someone from the US Environmental Protection Agency say on the record at a journalist conference last week that plastics emit pollution at every phase of their life cycle, and that life cycle starts with the extraction of fossil fuels, which is the first time we've ever seen the US government say that on the record. And that is the bare minimum of what we're asking them to do, which is recognize that plastics are a fossil fuel and that there is pollution along the whole life cycle. But I'm excited. I have high expectations for where the US government is going to take that new position and what that could potentially mean for the options that go into the plastics treaty, because we can't have a treaty that is lowest common denominator. We have to have a treaty that protects human rights, that prevents harm, as Frankie was talking about, and that addresses remedy. You know, right now we know that plastics contain more than 16,000 chemicals, different kinds of chemicals across all the different kinds of petrochemical plastics, and that only a couple thousand, if that, of those chemicals have been tested or documented in any way. And the US government, the Environmental Protection Agency, is right now reviewing five of the chemicals out of 16,000. And again, the bare minimum of what they should be doing is evaluating right now, after decades of production, the impacts of these 5 chemicals. And yet even then, we're optimistic. And I think that where I stand right now is I'm excited that we have so much resistance. I'm excited that we're making them uncomfortable and that discomfort is coming with some policy solutions. I also still remain deeply, deeply anxious about the future and the current state of things. And we've got to keep moving because we have no other choice. We have to keep fighting. And I'm incredibly proud to be in this fight with all of y'all and with everybody else in our coalitions. So thank y'all.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. And on that note, let's close it out. Let's keep fighting. Let's keep perpetuating this discomfort. Let's keep working together and finding hope and joy in these moments, in these spaces, because there is so much sorrow, there is so much anxiety. But I feel like it's moments like these and being in spaces with you all that reminds me of that beauty, of that fight, and of the need to keep moving.